Deshaun Martinez tugged at the edge of his fake beard, inspecting his disguise in the dim light of the bathroom mirror at Sunrise Hearth Cafe. The mirror was chipped and streaked with old water stains, reflecting back a version of himself that felt entirely foreign. He hadn't set foot in this location in nearly 2 years, and now here he was, posing as Mickey Rodriguez, an ex-truck driver down on his luck. Behind the camouflage of gray facial hair and a worn-out flannel, Deshaun hid not just his identity, but the deep frustration brewing inside him. The past quarter had been brutal. Profits were dropping, complaints were rising, and inventory reports made less sense with every week. The numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't tell the whole story. Deshaun needed to see for himself what was poisoning the heart of this place. As he stepped into the dim glow of the dining room, the flickering neon sign outside sputtered against the October night, casting eerie shadows over the cracked linoleum floors. The cafe resembled a weary sentinel beside the derelict train depot, loyal but forgotten. Inside, a skeleton crew shuffled through their nightly rituals. According to the register, only 17 customers had walked through the door all day. At this rate, the cafe wouldn't survive another 6 months. "You sure you want to stay for the deep clean?" asked Tommy, the night manager. Barely more than a kid, his lanky frame and tired eyes revealed more about the stress of management than any resume ever could. Deshaun nodded, lowering the brim of his cap. "Yeah, I need the hours. My driving days are over. Bad back." Tommy handed him a mop bucket without looking up. "Suit yourself. Don't touch the register, the safe, or the office. That's manager-only territory." As the final customer shuffled out around 11 p.m., Deshaun lingered, watching, observing. Rosa, the elderly cook with hands warped by arthritis, moved through the kitchen like she was 20 years younger. James, a college student, wiped down tables with one hand while scrolling on his phone with the other. And then there was Marisol. Marisol Guerrero had been a fixture here for 3 years. 34, single mother of 2, employee of the month 9 times. On paper, she was a dream. But Deshaun's instincts prickled every time her name crossed his desk. Something about her was too clean, too practiced. While the others gossiped or cut corners, Marisol worked in focused silence. Her eyes, dark and sharp, never missed a detail. She knew which tables needed a second sweep, which customers were having a rough day, and which teens were silently counting coins for coffee. By 1 a.m., the cafe was still, empty except for Deshaun and Marisol. Tommy had long gone, trusting them to lock up. Deshaun, pretending to be eager for hours, had insisted on staying. Marisol said little as she rotated the dish inventory, a job outside Deshaun's cover role. "You don't have to help with the dish." "Rotation," she said, her voice soft, carrying a faint accent he couldn't quite place. "It's not your job." "I don't mind," Deshaun said, genuinely intrigued. Dish rotation was something he'd hammered into policy. Safety, accountability, structure. So why did it feel like she was bending the rules? She hesitated before nodding. "Okay, just don't ask too many questions. I have my own way." Red flag. He followed her into the kitchen, where she began removing yesterday's bread, stale muffins, and slightly squished croissants from the display. Normally, all of it would be marked as waste and binned. "Where's the waste log?" Deshaun asked. "I'll handle it," she replied briskly. "Just help me carry these." Another red flag. 20 minutes passed in silence. Deshaun expected to see her trash the expired items. Instead, she began sorting them. She examined each loaf of bread as if it were a relic, checking for mold, squeezing for softness, inspecting texture with a care that baffled him. Then, the moment that twisted his gut. Marisol pulled a small brush from her apron and began scrubbing the expiration labels from the packaging. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low. "Quality control," she said calmly. "Most of this stuff is still good. Expiration dates are more like guidelines." Deshaun stood frozen. She was repackaging old bread. His mind raced. Lawsuits, contamination. Had his customers unknowingly been eating expired food? His hand instinctively moved toward his back pocket where his phone waited, ready to capture evidence. One recording and he could fire her, report her, even press charges. But something stopped him. Marisol wasn't careless. She wasn't malicious. She treated the bread like something sacred. After reheating a few loaves in the convection oven, the aroma filled the room with warmth, a deceptive comfort. It reminded Deshawn of his grandmother's kitchen. "Are you putting these back in the display?" he whispered. Marisol froze. Her expression turned to one of fear. "No," she said. "They're not for customers." "Then who are they for?" She looked at the clock. Almost 3 a.m. "I can't explain right now, but I swear, I'm not stealing. I'm not hurting anyone." She began packing the loaves into a large canvas bag, carefully wrapping each one in clean paper towels. Deshawn counted at least 15 loaves, muffins, and pastries. His chest tightened. He needed to understand. Not just for his business, but for something deeper he couldn't yet articulate. A truth lingered in the air, just out of reach. "Marisol," he said, more gently this time. "Please, I need to know what's going on." Deshawn stood frozen in the silence Marisol had left behind, the back door still swinging slightly on its hinges. The canvas bag filled with day-old bread was gone, swallowed by the darkness outside. His hand trembled slightly as it hovered over his phone. Food tampering was no small offense. He had enough to trigger an investigation that could shut this cafe down for good. But his instincts warred with his logic. He hadn't seen recklessness in her actions. He'd seen purpose. The room still carried the scent of reheated bread. A warmth lingered, defying the cold corporate policy that said food past its sell-by date had no value. Deshawn lowered his phone and looked around the quiet room. Marisol hadn't just been breaking rules. She was living by her own. And somewhere deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something noble in what she'd done. By dawn, Deshawn hadn't slept. He sat in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts cycling through confusion, curiosity, and something close to guilt. He had built his career on systems, structure, margins, and bottom lines. But Marisol had shown him a different kind of economy. One of compassion, community, and quiet defiance. He needed answers. Real ones. When he arrived early at the cafe, the fatigue was written all over him. His steps were slower, his jaw tight with determination. He gave Tommy a brief nod. "Couldn't sleep," he said simply. The morning dragged, the foot traffic nearly non-existent. Deshawn kept himself busy, but his real focus never drifted from Marisol. She manned the register with mechanical precision, her expression unreadable, but her eyes occasionally flicked in his direction. Then came the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Tommy asked him to restock supplies in the back. The storage room was a claustrophobic mess of paper towels, cleaning solution, and forgotten boxes. Deshawn searched quietly and methodically, his mind sharp despite the sleepless night. He found it tucked behind a stack of industrial soap containers, a red notebook held together with a stretched rubber band. Its cover was worn from use. His heartbeat quickened as he flipped it open. Page after page of neat blue handwriting detailed specific items and dates. But this wasn't inventory management. October 15th. 6 loaves of wheat bread, 4 blueberry muffins, 2 coffee cakes. Riverside Tunnel crew, 2 a.m. drop. James, wheelchair, asked for extra napkins. Sarah's baby getting bigger. October 17th, 8 loaves mixed, 12 pastries. Briar Park South Encampment. Gluten-free batch for Miguel, diabetic. Temperature dropping, brought extra thermoses. It wasn't just food delivery. It was humanity in action. Deshawn felt the weight of every entry. He turned to the financial summaries at the bottom of each page, receipts, costs, and out-of-pocket totals. $47.50, $62.85, $104. She was paying for all of it, buying expired bread. fueling her route, supplementing with store-bought essentials. She wasn't stealing. She was sacrificing. His chest tightened. 3 years of this. 3 years of a woman on minimum wage funding what was essentially a rogue humanitarian operation from a back-alley cafe. He barely noticed the figure at the door until her voice broke the silence. "Looking for something?" Deshawn turned. Marisol stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but her voice held no anger, only resignation. "I was just grabbing cleaning supplies." "That's my notebook," she said softly. "You shouldn't be reading it." There was no point lying anymore. Deshawn held the notebook up, his voice calm but edged with emotion. "Want to explain this to me?" Marisol hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her shoulders drooped as if she'd just removed a heavy coat. Her eyes flickered to the book in his hand. "You're going to get me fired. That depends on what you tell me." Silence hung in the cramped room. Then finally, she spoke. "Bread's a shame to waste," she whispered. "Always has been." He blinked. "That's it? That's your explanation? What else do you want? That I'm a criminal? That I'm breaking food laws? Putting your company at risk? Maybe I am. But I pay for what I take. Every single item. Tommy knows. He lets me do it. He just never asks questions." At that moment, Deshawn's phone buzzed. A message from his corporate assistant popped up. "Sunrise Hearth waste numbers look great this quarter. Best in the district. Whatever you're doing, it's working." He stared at it. The absurdity of it all. Marisol's nightly missions had been driving down waste numbers so effectively that corporate thought they had stumbled upon a miracle strategy. No policy, no directive, just one woman's quiet rebellion against hunger. And suddenly, the numbers made sense. Not as profits, but as people fed, as lives touched. For Deshawn, the balance sheet would never look the same again. Deshawn stared at Marisol, the red notebook still clutched in his hands. He thought about the bread she had repackaged and reheated, not to deceive, but to preserve. She hadn't been endangering lives. She had been protecting them in her own way, quietly, lovingly. "The health department doesn't know about this, do they?" he asked, his voice cautious. "No," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "Corporate doesn't either, but they wouldn't care. They only see numbers. They've never set foot in this neighborhood. They don't know what hunger feels like." Deshawn paused, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. The exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders bore invisible burdens, the quiet dignity in her presence. All this time, he had mistaken integrity for suspicion. She wasn't stealing. She was transforming discarded food into something sacred. "Why?" he finally asked. Marisol let out a bitter laugh. "You wouldn't understand. You don't live here. You don't see what I see." She reached for the notebook, but he pulled it gently out of reach. "Try me," he said. For a heartbeat, it seemed like she might open up. But then her face closed off, a protective wall rising. "I have to get back to work," she said. "Are you going to report me or not?" Deshawn didn't answer right away. How could he? This woman had been feeding dozens of people while he'd been buried in spreadsheets. He murmured, "I haven't decided yet." That night, he barely slept. The notebook lay on his nightstand, its pages like quiet accusations. Names, routes, expenditures, needs. He saw the gaps in his leadership, the lives behind the data he had ignored. By 5 a.m., Deshawn sat in his rental truck outside an aging apartment complex that matched the struggle in Marisol's eyes. It was the kind of place he had passed 100 times without ever seeing. Now he was there, seeking clarity. At 6:15, she emerged. 2 canvas bags slung over her shoulders, a steaming thermos in hand. She loaded up an old Honda Civic and drove off. Deshawn followed, guilt mingling with curiosity. The town looked different in the morning light. What once seemed run down now appeared lived in. The factory ruins and shuttered shops whispered stories of lives disrupted. Her car pulled into Riverside Park. Deshawn parked behind some trees and watched. Marisol walked to an old stone bridge near the creek, now dry and cracked. Slowly, figures emerged from the shadows. A man in a wheelchair with a blanket draped over his legs. A young mother clutching a toddler. A teen with a bulging backpack. More followed. 20 at least. Maybe more. No one pushed, no one shouted. They waited, patiently, respectfully. Marisol moved through the line like a minister in communion. "Good morning, James," she said, handing a loaf to the man in the wheelchair. "How's your back today?" "Better, thanks to you," he replied. She smiled and turned to the mother. "Sarah, I brought extra milk today and some of those blueberry muffins David loves." The mother choked back tears. "Marisol, you don't have to—" "Nonsense. Growing boys need their blueberries." Deshawn felt a lump rising in his throat. These were no longer statistics. They were people, with pain and pride, with joy and sorrow. The teenager stood off to the side, sketching with frozen fingers. Marisol approached and handed him a thermos. "Keep drawing, Miguel," she said. "Your art is beautiful." "Thank you, Miss Marisol. I finished your portrait." He tore a page from his notebook, a pencil drawing of her smiling mid-gift. Deshawn saw the emotion ripple across her face. "It's perfect," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." For nearly an hour, Deshawn sat unmoving. No cameras, no press. Just bread, hope, human connection. This wasn't charity. This was kinship. Then his phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Riverside Hearth is on the closure list." He stared at it. Then at the fading figures retreating into the dawn. This location wasn't just struggling. It was vital. Marisol wasn't just an employee. She was a lifeline. She walked back toward her car. Her eyes scanned the trees. And then they locked. She saw him. They stood like that, separated by branches and distance and truth. She knew he had watched, and he knew what he had seen. Later that day, Deshawn walked through the motions at the cafe, but his mind stayed at that bridge, at Marisol's hands, at the boy's drawing. At closing time, he waited as she finished the register count. "Marisol," he said softly. She looked up, her face unreadable. "If this is about the notebook—" "It's not," he said, glancing around the quiet, empty cafe. "We need to talk." Tommy had left an hour earlier, leaving the cafe wrapped in a hush that felt heavier than usual. Deshawn stood at the register, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. Marisol folded her arms, setting the cash drawer aside. "Then what?" she asked, guarded. Deshawn pulled off his baseball cap and rubbed his temples. The fake beard itched and felt like a joke now, a disguise no longer necessary. "My name isn't Mickey Rodriguez." Marisol didn't flinch. "I know." That single simple answer knocked the wind out of him. "You knew?" "Since your second day," she said, her tone calm, resigned. "You asked way too many questions about corporate policy for a former truck driver. Your hands are too soft, and you keep checking your phone like you're waiting on a quarterly report." Deshawn stared at her, speechless. "If you knew I wasn't who I said I was—" "I figured corporate sent you," she shrugged. "Loss prevention, maybe? Or a regional scout. I've just been waiting for the hammer to fall." He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and confessed, "I'm Deshawn Martinez. I own the company." For the first time, Marisol's mask cracked. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively stepped back. "You're the CEO?" He nodded slowly. Yes, I followed you this morning. I saw everything." Marisol sat heavily in a nearby chair, her hands trembling. "Oh God, I'm so fired." "Actually," Deshawn said quietly, sitting across from her, "I'm here to ask you why you never told us." That caught her off guard. "Told you what? That the neighborhood is struggling? That people are starving? That a loaf of bread can be the difference between hope and despair? Why didn't you come to corporate? Ask for support." Marisol gave a hollow laugh, bitter and edged with old pain. I did. 3 years ago. I wrote emails, sent letters. I begged for a food donation program, a partnership with shelters, something, anything, so the food we throw away could help someone. Her voice rose with every sentence, anger mingling with heartbreak. You want to know what I got back? Corporate policies, legal disclaimers, food safety excuses. Any employee caught giving away food will be terminated immediately. The words hit Deshawn like a slap. He remembered that policy. He had signed it. Standard legal protection. Standard ignorance. So you broke the rules? Oh, no, she said defiantly. I bought the bread. Every last crumb. At cost. With my paycheck. Then I did what I wanted with it. He stared at her. 3 years. From your own money. She nodded. Yes. How much have you spent? She hesitated, then whispered, maybe $15,000. Could be more. I stopped counting. Deshawn leaned back, stunned. That was more than half her annual salary. Spent not on herself, but on people who had nothing. The factory closure, Riverside Manufacturing. That was the tipping point, wasn't it? They were the heartbeat of this town, she said, her voice thick. When they left, everything fell apart. Families who had worked their whole lives were suddenly invisible. And I was here, watching, pouring coffee for parents who couldn't afford breakfast for their kids. So you started small, one loaf at a time, one family. I told myself it was temporary, that things would improve. She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. But they never did. I'm not stealing, she said firmly, locking eyes with him. I'm investing. In what? In dignity. In the belief that no one in this country should starve while perfectly good food is tossed in the trash. Deshawn sat there, silence stretching between them. For the first time in his career, he saw the company he had built not as a series of stores, but as platforms with the power to save lives or ignore suffering. Marisol, he said, voice softer than it had been all day, will you help me fix this? The following afternoon, Deshawn stood at the head of the corporate boardroom, all glass and mahogany, gleaming with success. Around the table sat 12 executives, district managers, legal advisors, financial analysts, all people who understood the language of risk and return. But today, he came to speak a different language. Thank you for coming on short notice, he began. Today, I want to talk about the Riverside Hearth location. Margaret Howell, VP of Operations, rifled through her notes. The underperforming site near the old depot. The closure paperwork is ready. Deshawn lifted a hand. Before we discuss that, I want you to meet someone. He turned to the door. Marisol, would you come in? She entered the room in a plain black dress, clutching a manila folder. Her expression was one of quiet courage. This is Marisol Guerrero. She's worked at Riverside Hearth for 3 years. I asked her here to share her story. Richard Chin, the company's legal counsel, frowned. Deshawn, is this about the employee complaint procedure? We have forms for that. It's not a complaint. Marisol, please. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she stepped forward and laid the red notebook on the table. For the past 3 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I've been purchasing expired food from my store and distributing it to homeless families. The room fell silent. Margaret was the first to respond. Excuse me? Every night, Marisol said, I buy the bread, reheat it to ensure safety, and give it to people who need it. Parents, veterans, teenagers with nowhere else to go. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. James lives in a wheelchair under a bridge. Sarah's child would go hungry without those. Muffins. Miguel's been sleeping in the park since his grandmother passed. Richard looked pale. Do you understand the legal exposure? The liability? I understand hunger, Marisol snapped. I understand that corporate policy can't feed a starving child. The room exploded into overlapping voices. Margaret worried about lawsuits. Finance brought up insurance implications. Deshawn raised a hand. Enough! Deshawn's voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. Enough! The room froze. Marisol, show them the numbers. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the red notebook. In the last 3 years, I've distributed approximately 3,200 meals. I've spent $15,847 of my own money. I've reheated and safety tested every single item. There have been 0 complaints, 0 illnesses, 0 incidents. She looked up, locking eyes with each executive. In that same period, this company has discarded over 12,000 pounds of edible food at Riverside alone. The weight of her words landed hard. The silence was suffocating. Deshawn stepped forward. Marisol has been doing the work we refuse to even acknowledge. She's been turning waste into hope, on her dime, because we told her it was against company policy to care. Margaret bristled. We have a business to run, Deshawn. We can't take on every societal issue. Deshawn took out his phone and showed them the photo of Miguel's portrait of Marisol. This is what our company looks like to that community. Not our branding, not our polished mission statements. This. He turned to the room, eyes sharp. Effective immediately, we are launching a new initiative, Midnight Harvest, a sanctioned after-hours food recovery and distribution program in all 17 locations. The objections began immediately. Legal liability, Richard muttered. We'll manage it, Deshawn replied. Insurance exposure, added Frank from finance. We'll absorb it. The health department. We'll work with them, Deshawn interrupted, his tone unwavering. We'll establish protocols that protect dignity and safety. He turned to Marisol. I'm offering you a promotion. I want you to run this program. Company-wide, develop the protocols, build the team, make it real. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Richard cleared his throat. Deshawn, I must object. If someone gets sick, if there's a lawsuit, Deshawn faced him squarely. If we can ensure a sourdough loaf is safe when it's behind glass at 9 a.m., then we can ensure it's safe at 9 p.m. when it feeds a hungry child. That's not how insurance works. Then change how it works, Deshawn said, his voice rising. I'd rather face a lawsuit for feeding people than tell shareholders we're comfortable with waste while our neighbors starve. He looked around at the stunned faces. Midnight Harvest launches next month. If anyone here has a problem with that, they can submit their resignation. No one moved. The only sound was Marisol quietly weeping in relief. Six months later, Deshawn stood in the parking lot of Riverside Hearth. This time, no disguise, no pretense. A new sign shimmered in the morning light. Midnight Harvest partner location, turning surplus into hope. The cafe itself had transformed. Gone was the flickering neon. Now, warm LED lighting bathed the entrance in gold. The lot bustled with life. Inside, 3 new hires handled the morning rush, while Tommy, now a district trainer, offered guidance with practiced confidence. But it was the back room that made Deshawn's chest swell. Marisol stood before a laptop, webcam trained on her face. On the screen, teams from all 17 locations listened intently. Remember, she said, dignity is just as important as safety. These aren't scraps, they're meals shared with neighbors. Behind her, Miguel and another volunteer packed pastries with practiced care. Miguel wore a Midnight Harvest badge and smiled with quiet pride. Temperature control is key, Marisol continued. Everything reheats to 165 degrees. Each item is time-stamped, inspected, and packed in thermal containers. Deshawn smiled at the memory of Legal's initial protests. Marisol had shut it down with a single line. The homeless can't afford food poisoning. They know safety better than we think. A voice crackled through the screen. Seattle location here. How do we start working with local shelters? One relationship at a time, Marisol answered. Don't try to feed everyone on day one. Build trust, then grow. We served 40 people our first month. Last month, over 800 inches. A soft tap on Deshawn's shoulder pulled him away. He turned to see Sarah Martinez, now in a Sunrise Hearth uniform. "Mr. Martinez," she said, emotion thick in her voice. "Can I speak with you?" Outside, little David played near the new seating area. 6 months ago, we were living in our car. David cried from hunger every night. I was stealing baby formula. Now we have an apartment. David has books, a bed. I'm taking college classes in business. She smiled through tears. And I help pack food twice a week for families still where we were. You gave us more than food. You gave us a future. Through the cafe window, Deshawn spotted James, the man in the wheelchair, working on his laptop. The company had launched a remote customer service pilot for differently abled individuals. Sister Catherine coordinated evening pickups with Tommy. Outside, a city councilwoman and Marisol discussed warming shelters for winter. Sarah followed Deshawn's gaze. It's not charity anymore, it's community. And she was right. Midnight Harvest had become a national model. Volunteers earned stipends and references. Shelters gained allies. Job seekers found hope. Housing programs launched, dignity spread. His phone buzzed, a text from the board. Forbes just featured Midnight Harvest. Stock is up 12%. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Deshawn smiled. Marisol stepped outside, coffee in hand. She looked content. How's expansion going? He asked. Better than I dreamed. 12 locations active, 3 more next month. Last week alone, we redirected 2,400 pounds of food from dumpsters to dinner tables. She gestured to the volunteers, the councilwoman, the line of customers. The bigger picture, she said, is we remembered something important. What's that? The soul of a company isn't in a boardroom. It's in a loaf of bread that was never meant to be wasted. As if on cue, Miguel carried a tray of fresh bread to a waiting van, marked Midnight Harvest Mobile. Volunteers loaded meals with reverence. Deshawn watched it all, this beautiful convergence of business and humanity. For the first time in years, he wasn't just running a company. He was part of a mission. And the bread, warm, fragrant, alive with meaning, had never tasted so much like home.